Good morning again. I have the pleasure of welcoming our first speaker for this morning. Her name is Liz Balck Monsma. Liz received her law degree from Western Michigan University, Thomas Cooley Law School, and her bachelor's degree in psychology, shout out to psychology, from St. Mary's College in Notre Dame. Between undergraduate studies and law school, Liz spent 2 years as an AmeriCorps volunteer, co-directing an after-school program for immigrant children, and returning with the Minnesota Advocates for Human Rights. During law school, Liz externed at the Immigrant and Refugee Appellate Center in Alexandria, Virginia. She also worked as a law clerk at a civil litigation law firm, Powers Chapman PC in Troy, Michigan. After graduating in 2007, Liz practiced primarily in the firm's personal injury section while volunteering as a pro bono attorney at the Immigration Law Clinic at the University of Detroit Mercy Law School. Then in 2009, Liz returned to her native Grand Rapids to become the staff attorney and later the legal services director at Justice for Our Neighbors West Michigan, a nonprofit immigration legal clinic. In June 2016, Liz founded Monsma Law Office, a private immigration law practice, and she lives in Grand Rapids now with her family. I'm excited to have her come, one, because I think it's important to have people who are in a field to talk about the field. This is different than having people who care about a field talk about a field. And so I'm thankful for you today, and my prayer is that you will be received with great welcome and interest. Now, the goal is not that you agree with everything that Liz has to say, but the goal is that you listen well to what Liz has to say. Thank you, Liz.
Good morning. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everybody, for a very warm welcome so far. We'll wait to see after I finish my talk whether or not you'll welcome me warmly. Immigration is obviously a pretty divisive topic, especially in this election cycle. But my hope today is that we will we only have 30 minutes, so we're not going to do an exhaustive discussion on these things. But the point today is just to plant a few seeds and to maybe have you rethink some of the things that you might hear in the news, you might hear from our politicians, you might hear from pundits. So it's just a seed planter. There's a lot to cover in this half hour that we have together, but what I'm going to try to do is hit on three main topics. So immigration myths and facts. Okay, there are probably 100 myths that we could talk about, but I'm just going to focus on 4. Next, we're going to just do a very quick Immigration 101, and this is, again, pretty whittled down. So unfortunately, I don't think you can get college credit for today's Immigration 101, but hopefully you get a little bit more insight into the system. And then lastly, I'll give you my very, very layperson biblical reflection on how I see immigration and how Christians can offer hospitality to the sojourner, to the stranger. Okay? And one other thing I want to say before we get started is that you might have guessed, I'm not an immigrant myself. I'm born in the United States, went to East Grand Rapids High School. I come as a witness. I've walked along hundreds of families who've gone through the immigration process. So I'm really here just to witness to tell you about what I've seen over the years, to share with you some of my experiences with a pretty incredible group of people that I have the privilege of working with. All right, let's get started. So we're going to hit on 4 myths. Like I said, we're going to do the economy, that immigrants hurt our economy, the immigrants are criminals, that we should build a wall, and that I hear this a lot, and too, even within my family over Thanksgiving meals, that, our relatives did it right, why can't they? And unless I've noted otherwise, and I've tried to cite to websites so that you can check out my facts if you want to, or learn more if you'd like, but pretty much everything else is from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They put out a document, they update it every couple of years. It's a fantastic resource and has a pretty great I think, sort of nonpartisan way of looking at immigration. So it's a great document to start from. All right, you ready? All right, so we hear all the time that immigrants take our jobs or that immigrants are bad for our economy. And the reality is it's not true. Immigrants are job creators. Studies have shown that for every one immigrant business owner, up to 5 jobs are created for US-born workers. More than 40%, this is, I think, so amazing. I didn't know this until I did a presentation on myths and facts for Aquinas College, I think last year. But 40% of Fortune 500 companies were either founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. That's incredible. Look at those products. McDonald's, how American can you get? McDonald's was founded by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. And then in Michigan, we this is, I think, statistic from maybe 2012. Immigrants make up about 6.8% of the workforce, and approximately 2% are unauthorized. So we're talking a pretty small percentage of our workforce in Michigan, but important, especially in West Michigan with our agriculture business. Also, I think what's interesting too, another kind of side point is, I think we hear a lot about immigration, especially right now, Mexico, Central America, but really the Asian American population is quite large, and it's a quite large minority group in our country. So Asian-owned businesses in Michigan have approximately $7.7 billion in sales in a year, and Latino-owned businesses $3.9 billion in sales. And I just also want to sort of comment to go back to the politics of immigration. Rick Snyder created a department called the Office for New Americans and has 2 staff people working in his office in Lansing. His really sole purpose is to make immigration make immigrants want to come to the state. Of course, Rick Snyder, you can imagine, is very economic focused and very business focused. But I think it's important to kind of note that immigration doesn't have to be partisan. And I think until this election cycle, I probably would have stood up here and argued that it isn't partisan, it shouldn't be, that it's quite beneficial to both sides of the aisle. Okay. Crime. So we hear this all the time. We hear that the people who are coming to our country from other countries are criminals, that they come here, they're gang members or they're rapists. In fact, studies show that places with a higher population of immigrants have actual lower numbers of crime. And I've cited to this report that I found again in the U.S. Commerce document. The conservative group America's Majority Foundation found that crime rates are lowest in states with the highest immigration growth rates. And studies have shown that immigrants are actually less likely to be behind bars than native-born Americans, and among men, young men, incarceration rates are lowest for immigrants. So just a little seed. When you hear statements that you hear on the news or from politicians, I just ask that you dig a little bit deeper. Okay, build a wall. Okay, we could spend all day on this one. This is one of my favorite ones, mostly just because it makes me crazy. Okay, so build a wall. This is not a new idea. This has been an idea passed down by many politicians. Right now, and I'm trying to stay clear of one candidate's name, but I couldn't in this slide, especially after the RNC this week. So building a 2,000-mile wall along the southern border would make us safer, improve national security, and would stop illegal immigration. Well, the first point is nearly half of, some studies show 40%, some say 50% of all undocumented people here entered with a legal document, with a visa, and then they simply overstayed. They didn't leave for whatever reason. So a wall wouldn't affect half of the 11 million people that are here, that come to our country. Okay, now, we already have 700 miles, approximately 650 miles of border fencing. President Bush in 2006 asked the Congress to give him $1.2 billion to put up fences along part of the borderline. What So we already know what happens when we try to do this. And basically, it's very expensive, and the terrain, if you can imagine, our southern border is quite treacherous. So there's a river there are mountains there's desert and sand. So just the logistics of putting up concrete structures and rebar is quite challenging. So what people found is that you couldn't put a wall in the middle of the Rio Grande, so they'd have to bring it back hundreds of feet into the U.S. And I saw one piece where there's like a golf course in between this no man's land, so they actually have to go out of the U.S., but not into Mexico to go play their golf game. It's just very complicated and difficult. And what we saw is that the government had to take property from private landowners, from ranchers, from people who lived on the border, and people were not happy. And then the other thing that's a little bit more soft, if you will, is that the government had to override certain protections for environmental and Native American treaties. So there were some, there's endangered species of birds and butterflies even that migrate back and forth between Mexico and the US every year. And studies have shown that it's negatively affecting the natural migration of our wildlife. Not to mention our Native American brothers and sisters whose land was, some land was taken back in order to build the wall. So experts estimate, Mr. Trump has put forth lots of numbers, but really experts say that the wall will cost between $15 and $25 billion just to build it because of all the things I just talked about. They'd have to buy land from private property owners, they'd have to go through swaths of land that really wouldn't take concrete, but then every year it would cost about $750 million to maintain. And then one last little point, I think Mexico is pretty clear that they will not pay for it. So coming up with that money, might be a little tricky. Okay, so the last thing I just want to say, and again, this is a conference about Jesus and politics, so I'm pushing a little bit here, but I just wanted to say that a lot of conservative experts in the field of foreign policy really think this idea is terrible. So in an open letter to Donald Trump in March, about 70 Republican foreign policy experts basically said it's not helpful to our foreign policy relationships, and it's really misguided. So, okay, my family did it right. Why can't they? So we'll talk about this a little bit when we get to Immigration 101, about what it is it takes in order to become a lawful permanent resident in this country. But the main thing to remember is that my great-great-grandparents, and potentially some of yours, probably didn't have to deal with the laws that are before immigrants today. So we haven't had an overhaul of the immigration system since 1965. Before then, there were no limits to the number of visas given to people who are coming from the Americas, so South America, Central America, North America. And Congress hasn't changed the number of visas since 1990. That means when we talk about what immigration reform might look like, or what the president can and can't do, the number of visas, there's a huge backlog. There's some people who will need to wait 20, 25 years for their visa to become ready. That number could be changed by our US Congress. Without touching any or changing any other laws, they could just change those numbers based on the demand, the supply-demand that has presented itself for the last 30 years. And then today's line might, frankly, be non-existent for some people. So those 11 million people that are here illegally, those people, trust me, because I've talked to a lot of them in West Michigan, would do anything to get in a line. There just is no line for them right now. And then I just every immigration talk has to have something with Ellis Island, so I threw it in there. But basically, just to illustrate that, that studies show that about 2% of people who came through Ellis Island were denied entry. And that was because they didn't have, I think it was like a $10 entry fee, or they had some sort of health issue. Okay, ready? Immigration 101. Everybody doing okay? It's early, it's Saturday, everyone's fine, plenty of donuts, okay. All right, so we're gonna hit 3 points. How does an immigrant get status? So what does that even look like? And then special categories of immigrants, and then let's talk about that line that people are supposed to get into. So first, there are 3 categories of immigration law. So first is employment. An employer would apply for an immigrant, a particular immigrant, family. Somebody has a US citizen spouse or a child or a lawful permanent resident spouse or child, and then humanitarian. So when I worked at the nonprofit, Justice for Our Neighbors, probably 50 to 75% of our cases were humanitarian-based, victims of serious crimes, unaccompanied children. And just one point about this is the immigration system is based on a petitioner-beneficiary relationship. So you can't just show up and say, I'm a really good worker, I'm super nice, I'm not gonna cause any trouble, give me a visa. There really is no line for that type of person. You need to have a petitioner apply for you, even if it's, picking blueberries in our West Michigan farms, if it's that you wanna come and study, a school has to basically say, yes, I want this person to come and study here. The other thing to point out before we delve into it further too is that I'll explain a little bit about the system. So the first way that you get into the immigration system is that you receive a non-immigrant visa. So that would be, like if I were going to apply for my spouse, that's called an I-130 family petition. So I'd apply for him, prove that we had a good faith marriage, and then he could be eligible to apply for a green card, a lawful permanent resident status, immigrant visa. There are lots of names for the green card. Once he had the green card, because I'm a US citizen, in 3 years he could apply for his US citizenship. If you're not married to a US citizen, it takes 5 years. So basically, for most people, for a lot of people, it's at least a 6-year process, but more than likely because of the federal government wait times and just the time it takes to get cases processed, you're looking at 6, 7 years to become a US citizen. It's long and it's expensive. The other thing to note too is that it's a fee-based system. So all of the people who are processing the green card applications or the student visas, everything is fee-based. So immigrants pay our government to process their documentation. So everybody at the USCIS, for example, in Detroit, United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, they are paid by immigrants who are applying for the benefit of immigration. It's not a right, it's a benefit. Okay? So employment. I'm not an employment immigration attorney, so this is pretty basic stuff. I've really handled just a handful of pastor visas for employment. Otherwise, I'm much more family and humanitarian knowledgeable. So, like I said, the employer would apply for the particular worker, and for permanent resident visas, the employer has to show that there's nobody else in the US who could fill that position. And then the categories are quite limited, right? That's not, sometimes we see this a lot where there are people who have bachelor's degrees in education and they want to teach, or work at preschool or something. Well, that's pretty difficult to get a visa for that because they don't have an advanced degree, there's no real special need. It can be pretty easily filled with American-born workers. So a lot of people who have great skills and have a great resume just might not have an opportunity for employment visas. And something that I hear a lot about from last year, I did a presentation in front of an agriculture group through MSU, and a lot of farmers came, and they were pretty concerned about the state of immigration. And their perspective is they cannot find enough native-born workers for their farms, and their fruit or their vegetables kind of sit on the vine and don't get picked. They said that US citizen high school kids or college kids will come home and show up to the first day of orientation at their farm, and then they won't make it to lunch. So when we talk about low-skilled, I also kind of want to challenge us to think about low-skilled labor, people who are farmers. I don't particularly find that to be low-skilled. I'm not a farmer, I wouldn't know the first thing. But people who come from Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador or Mexico, who are farmers, who primarily work in fields and in agriculture, they have a skill. And it's something that I think we definitely need and want. But there just aren't enough visas for that category. And then student visas are sort of, we kind of throw them into the employment-based category, but students have to show sometimes $10,000, $20,000 is sitting in a bank account overseas so that when the US government brings them into the US, they're not tempted to work because a lot of student visa holders are not allowed to work. We'll skip ahead to humanitarian basics. So whenever you think of humanitarian, I think a lot of people think immediately refugee. The only difference between refugee and asylee is that refugees are identified outside of the US. They do all their processing and background checks in, likely not in their home country because they're fleeing from war or persecution, but in a refugee camp or in another country. And they have to prove that they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on their political beliefs, based on their membership in a particular social group. And again, just really want to hit home that, especially because of the Syrian refugee crisis as of late, it takes, I think 18 to 24 months is conservative. I think people spend years sitting in refugee camps waiting for a chance to come to another country. And they go through exhaustive background checks before they're admitted into refugee status. The other visas I just want to kind of throw out there to you that exist are the VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, for victims of domestic violence who are married to US citizens. Special immigrant juvenile status, that's for the kids who are coming from the Northern Triangle countries who are coming unaccompanied, they're afraid of gangs, they're abused by their parents or whatever it is, they're coming to the US by themselves, that's SIJ. The U visa is for victims of serious crimes in the US, T visa is for trafficking visas, and then the DREAM Act. There is no such thing as the DREAM Act, but the idea of the dreamer is that kids were brought to the US by their parents. And they've gone to school here, they've graduated, and then they find out, oh, I don't have a social security number, I can't get a driver's license, I can't go to college. So because the DREAM Act, unfortunately, with a lot of bipartisan support, did not pass, in 2012, the Obama administration initiated just a policy basically to allow kids deferred action for childhood arrivals to just get a 2-year work permit. And the work permit is what allows people to get, in the state of Michigan and many states, the work permit is what you need to get a social security card and then also get a driver's license. Without that work permit, these kids don't have access to that. Okay, blazing forward. Family basics. So only particular people can apply for particular immigrants. So basically, I won't go through all of this, but we just want to highlight that if you are a US citizen or you have your green card, you can apply for particular people. So you can't apply for your cousin, you can't apply for your grandma or your mother-in-law. It's very specific. And the other thing that I hear a lot is just the myth that if you get married to a US citizen, you're automatically good to go. Well, that's not true. You have to go through the same process. All right, let's get to the line. So I think what we've already talked about, we've already hit about, certain family members are not allowed to apply for other family members. There's certain very specific visas that are allocated to employment-based cases. But also just to note that in immigration, the definition of an adult is the age 21, not 18. So a child can't apply for his or her parent until he or she turns 21, which I think also kind of busts the myth of anchor babies. Because I know, like, when my kid brother was 21, he did seem like a baby, but he was not. He was definitely an adult. So the other thing, too, is the waiting line. So this is a little bit confusing. I'm on the 4th bullet point if you're following along. Some countries, especially if you're a US citizen sibling who lives in the Philippines, you could be waiting about 22 years for your green card, your visa to become available. But in reality, that's more like 100 years because of the way that the visa bulletin that the State Department issues and the wait lines, and it's not like every month we get more and more visas allocated. We have as many visas as we have. So experts have shown that really people will be waiting a lifetime. So you can sort of see where people might get desperate and come to different human trafficking ways, frankly, of getting in or smuggling to get into the US. And then there's something called the diversity lottery, but it's not for countries like Mexico or China or the Philippines, the places who have the biggest demand. And then, of course, the humanitarian visas, which is a pretty tiny microcosm of the visas. The next page, you can't read it, I can't read it, but this is really a cool document. If you Google what part of legal immigration don't you understand, this document comes right up. And I usually, when I'm talking to church groups and stuff, I'll put it on a big piece of paper and pass it around. But it just kind of shows how complicated the system is, and that for a lot of people, the 11 million people here certainly, there is no line. Just wanted to quickly say that there are only a few defenses to deportation, so for people who are picked up by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, there's not a ton of options for them. There's asylum, you can say you're afraid to return to your home country. There is prosecutorial discretion. You could ask the government to not send you back to your home country, cancellation of removal, but all of those types of defenses are quite limited depending on how long you've been here and who your relatives are. And unfortunately, there's just no rule for people there's no defense for people who are just really good people who have lived here a long time and have never committed a crime. All right, I think we need one more up. There you go, thank you. All right, so a layperson, I will leave the theology to those who are actual theologians. I will just say, as a born and raised Catholic who married a CRC boy who worked for the Methodist Church, I come to this from a very ecumenical place. So, we hear a lot about, there are hundreds of scripture passages that talk about immigrants or sojourners or the stranger. And I think immigration really gives us a good chance to apply what we hear in the Bible to our neighbors, our brothers and sisters here in Grand Rapids and West Michigan. So we've all seen the Leviticus scripture. I won't read it today, but what I really see in that is that it's a radical idea, that you treat somebody who came here from another land as if they were your brother or sister, if they were your neighbor and grew up next to you in East Grand Rapids. That's radical. And that hospitality isn't just cookies and coffee, which is great, that's hospitality, definitely, but it's also, making sure that our laws are not running afoul of those values that God has instilled in us. And this comes up every conversation I have with somebody is the Bible also says that we need to obey the rule of law, and that's true. God says that, Jesus says that over and over again. However, I really feel that God also gives us the power that if God's law is being trampled on by man's law, we have a duty to fight through non-violent means to fix those laws, to fight, to tell our congresspeople that we don't like these laws, that we want you, it's your job to fix them, we want you to fix them. And some of the principles that I see across a lot of the Christian faith is really finding laws that protect the family unit. Just like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, we want to protect that family unit. And we don't want laws that discriminate or demonize a specific group of people. Mexico is big right now. Muslims, big right now. We're terrified of Syrians. But it hasn't always been that way. It was Chinese. The Chinese Exclusion Act is the first act of legislation in our immigration law. And then, the Irish and German people, we, also had our fair share of discrimination. And then I think also God would want us to treat our workers fairly. We need the work. We offer work to people, and we should treat them fairly. Okay. The last thing I wanted to say before I leave you is that I really feel like how we talk about immigrants as Christians, how we represent ourselves as Christians is really important. So referring to people, and I mean, you can't turn on the radio or the TV without hearing somebody say illegal immigrant. And this is something that's difficult. I don't know really what undocumented immigrants prefer to be called, but I think undocumented is a great start. So instead of referring to somebody as an illegal, we refer to them as undocumented. They just don't have their papers, or they don't have them yet. I feel like when we call a person an illegal, we strip them of their humanity. And it's much easier to say all illegals should go back. my grandparents were legal. These people are illegals. Quickly strips them of their dignity. And it also creates a second class of people in our country. So we have the righteous, the American-born, and the people who happen to be born in another country and came here for economic reasons or for violence, just to escape violence. So the other thing that kind of drives me crazy, especially as a lawyer, where you're dealing with people who violate laws and rules, as immigration law is civil law. So when somebody walks across the border, iwi, or entering without inspection, they just come across with a smuggler or a coyote. Yes, they are violating law. But we don't call somebody who's actually convicted of a heinous crime like murder or rape an illegal. We would never call somebody an illegal. We don't have prisons full of illegals. But we are quick to call people with different color skin who speak differently than us illegals. And I love this mural. I don't even know where it is, but I found it and I just loved it. I think really, as a Christian, is a child of God, can a child of God ever really be illegal? And I think that's ultimately how we speak about other human beings out in the world matters. Okay, the last thing is just, if you are interested in learning more about immigration and Christianity, there are great resources. We live in an awesome town who really, this city really embraces immigration. I think there's a long way to go, but there's lots going on. So just in a couple of weeks, there's a screening of the movie called Documented. I've seen it, it's fantastic. The Office of the Social Justice of CRC is putting it on, it's fantastic. Volunteer at any of the number of immigration organizations. I just plugged Justice for Our Neighbors because I have to, but the diocese has a program. The Wesleyans at City Life Church have an immigration program. Bethany Lutheran, there are plenty of opportunities to get involved, walk alongside an immigrant to see for yourself. And there are just other great resources out there if you're curious and interested. So I think that's my time, but thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you later.